You're standing at the grocery cooler, and the price on a dozen eggs has jumped again. You do the math in your head. You put the carton back. You tell yourself you'll do without. But 3 weeks ago I was standing somewhere else entirely. A dirt floor cellar under a farmhouse north of Peterborough, Ontario, and I was holding an egg that was 2 years old. No fridge, no power, and it was perfectly good. Here's what I learned. A Canadian family could keep a full winter's worth of eggs fresh for close to a year, using nothing but a bucket, cold water, and one cheap ingredient you can buy today. It worked. It was ordinary. And somewhere along the way, it was quietly erased from every kitchen in this country. The trail I followed led me back to a wartime document from 1918, printed by a government board most Canadians have never heard of. And before I'm done, I'm going to hand you the exact method, step by step, so you can do it this weekend in the home you already live in. Apartment, condo, old farmhouse, doesn't matter. But let me start where I started. In that cellar, with my skepticism and a jar I couldn't explain, the man who owned that farmhouse was named Walter. He was 87 years old when I met him, and he'd lived on that same land his whole life. I'd gone out there for a completely different reason. I was chasing a story about root cellars, about how folks kept potatoes and carrots through a Canadian winter before refrigeration. That's the rabbit hole I'd fallen into. I was tired of watching my grocery bill climb, tired of feeling like I depended on a system that could fail me, and I wanted to know how my grandparents' generation got by. Walter took me down into his cellar on a set of stairs so steep I had to turn sideways. The air down there was cold and still, maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit, even in late summer. And along the back wall, on a wooden shelf worn smooth by 100 years of hands, sat a big gray stoneware crock, the kind you'd see holding pickles. I asked him what was in it. He said, eggs. I looked inside. The crock was full of a cloudy, slightly milky liquid, and under the surface I could see the pale shapes of dozens of eggs, sitting there like they were floating in still water. My first thought, honestly, was that this was rotten, spoiled, some forgotten mess. I actually took a half step back. Walter laughed at me. He reached in with his bare hand, pulled one out, rinsed it under a tap, cracked it into a bowl, and it was a bright, firm, orange-yolked egg. He told me it had gone into that crock the previous autumn, nearly a year before, and he ate eggs out of that crock all winter long, never once buying a carton at the store. That's the moment my whole investigation changed direction. Forget the potatoes. I needed to know what was in that crock, because think about what that means. This man had solved, decades ago, the exact problem that was emptying my wallet at the checkout. He had a year's supply of protein sitting in his cellar for pennies. No electricity, no monthly bill, no dependence on a truck arriving at a store on time. So I asked him the obvious question. What's the liquid? And that's where the trail got interesting. Walter said his mother had called it water glass. He said you bought it at any general store or drugstore when he was a boy, that every farm wife in the township kept a crock going, and that nobody thought it was special because everybody did it. Then, sometime after the war, he said, it just stopped. The stores stopped carrying it. The young wives stopped asking for it. And within a generation, a piece of knowledge that had fed rural Canada through every hard winter simply vanished. Water glass. I'd never heard the term in my life, and I'm a man in my late 50s who grew up around old people. So I did what I always do. I started digging. The first thing I found is that water glass is an old household name for a chemical called sodium silicate. It's a clear, syrupy liquid, and when you dilute it with water, it turns slightly cloudy, exactly like what I'd seen in Walter's crock. It's completely inert. It's used today in all sorts of industrial things. But for about 60 or 70 years, from roughly the 1880s right up through the 1940s, it was the single most common way ordinary people in Canada, the United States, and Britain kept eggs from spoiling. And here's why it works, because I needed to understand the why before I'd believe any of it. A fresh egg, straight from a hen, comes coated in a natural layer called the bloom, or the cuticle. That coating seals thousands of tiny pores in the shell. But the bloom breaks down over time, and once air and bacteria get through those pores, the egg goes bad. That's the whole game. Keep the air out, and the egg stays good almost indefinitely. When you lower a fresh, unwashed egg into a water glass solution, the liquid seals every one of those pores completely. Air can't get in, bacteria can't get in, moisture can't escape. The egg is essentially placed in suspended animation. It just waits. I found study after study confirming this. There was research done back in the 1910s and 1920s at agricultural stations across North America, testing exactly how long eggs held up in water glass. The numbers were consistent and honestly a little shocking. Eggs kept in a proper sodium silicate solution stayed fresh and usable for 9 months to a full year, with spoilage rates down around 5% or less when the eggs were fresh and clean going in. 9 months. From a bucket in a cellar. Now let me tell you what a fresh dozen was going for the week I stood in that grocery store, because this is where the whole thing stopped being a history lesson and started being personal. I watched the price cross $7 for a carton of large eggs. $7. My mother would have fainted. And here was Walter, 87 years old, on a fixed pension, paying nothing all winter because he'd filled one crock in September with eggs that cost him a fraction of that when they were cheap and plentiful. Question 1. If this was so simple, so cheap, and so effective, why had it disappeared so completely that a man like me, who actively hunts down this kind of knowledge, had never once heard the term water glass? And question 2. Where exactly did this method come from? And who wrote it down? That second question is what led me to the document, and the document is where this story turns. I spent the better part of 2 weeks going through old agricultural bulletins and archives online. Most of the early instructions I found were American farm papers out of the northern states, extension pamphlets, that sort of thing. But I wanted the Canadian trail. Walter's mother learned it somewhere, and I wanted to know where, and I found it. Buried in references to Canada's food policy during the First World War, there was mention of a body called the Canada Food Board. Most people today have never heard of it, and that's not an accident. It existed for only a short window, from 1917 to 1919, created during the war to manage the country's food supply, while so much of our production was being shipped overseas to feed troops and allies. The Canada Food Board did something remarkable. It ran a massive public campaign teaching ordinary Canadian households how to preserve food, waste nothing, and stay self-sufficient. And among the methods they actively promoted to Canadian families was the water glass preservation of eggs. It was printed in circulars, taught in demonstrations, pushed into kitchens right across the country as a patriotic duty. Think about that for a second. There was a time, just over 100 years ago, when the Canadian government was going door to door, in effect, teaching people to store a year of eggs in a bucket. It was considered essential knowledge. It was considered survival. And now it's gone so thoroughly that you probably thought I was making it up when this video started. So I sat with that. And the second question got louder and louder. What happened? How does knowledge this useful, this proven, this officially endorsed, simply evaporate from an entire nation in the span of a single lifetime? That's when I stopped looking at the method and started looking at what replaced it. Because knowledge like this doesn't just fall out of people's heads. Something pushes it out. And when I found what did the pushing, I got genuinely angry. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The reason your great-grandmother preserved eggs and you don't isn't that her way was worse. Her way worked beautifully. The reason is that somewhere between her kitchen and yours, a whole set of industries figured out they could make a great deal of money if you stopped keeping food and started buying it fresh, in small amounts, over and over and over again. Forever. Let me walk you through what I mean, because the timeline lines up almost too perfectly. Look at when water glass disappeared. Walter said it started fading right after the Second World War. in the late 1940s and into the 1950s. Now look at what was happening in Canadian homes in exactly those years. That's the exact stretch when the electric refrigerator went from a rich family's luxury to a standard appliance in nearly every home. In the 1930s, only a small fraction of Canadian households owned a fridge. By the late 1950s, the overwhelming majority did. And a refrigerator changes everything about how you think about food. Suddenly, you're not storing a year's worth of anything. You're storing a week's worth, because you can just go get more. The fridge didn't only cool your food, it quietly rewired the whole rhythm of how a household fed itself. It made you dependent on a constant resupply, and a constant resupply is exactly what the grocery business was built to sell you. At the very same time, the modern supermarket was taking over from the corner store and the general store. The general store was where you bought water glass by the tin. The supermarket had no reason to sell it. Why would they teach you to buy 10 dozen eggs once a year and put them away when they'd rather sell you 1 dozen every single week, 52 weeks a year, at whatever price the market would bear? Do that math over a lifetime. 1 dozen a week, every week, for 50 years. That's 2,600 cartons of eggs, bought one at a time, at retail, at the exact moments prices are highest, versus a family that buys in bulk when eggs are cheap and stores them for pennies. The difference over a lifetime isn't small. It's thousands upon thousands of dollars quietly transferred out of ordinary people's pockets. Nobody sat in a room and banned water glass. It's subtler and, honestly, more effective than that. They simply stopped selling it, stopped teaching it, and let a single generation of forgetting do the rest. The knowledge didn't get outlawed, it got orphaned. And an orphan's skill dies in 1 generation, because if your mother doesn't show you, and the store doesn't stock it, and the school doesn't mention it, how would you ever know it existed? That's the real trick, by the way, and I want you to hold on to it. You don't preserve eggs when they're expensive, you preserve them when they're cheap. And if you want to go even deeper into this world of forgotten Canadian self-sufficiency, I've put everything I know into one place. The books are called Canadian Edge, Deep Canadian, and Canadian Complete, and together they cover dozens of methods exactly like this one. Techniques that fed ordinary Canadian families through hard winters, depressions, and wartime shortages, written down so they won't disappear a second time. If today's video lit something up in you, these books will keep that fire going. You'll find them mentioned in the description below. So I had my method, or so I thought. I understood what water glass was and why it worked. But 2 questions were eating at me, and they were bigger than the first. That's what happened. A method the Canadian government once considered vital to national survival became so obscure that finding it now feels like uncovering treasure. And the people who benefited from you forgetting are the same people you hand your money to every single week. I told you I got angry. But anger doesn't fill a crock. So let me get practical, because I know exactly who's listening right now. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, this is all fine for a fellow like Walter with a farmhouse and a dirt floor cellar 40 degrees cold in July, but I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the city. I don't have a root cellar. I don't have a barn. I don't even have a spare closet. This isn't for me. I want to talk to you directly for a minute, because you're exactly the person this next part is for. This is the section I built for the folks who don't have land, don't have a cellar, and assume every old method requires a farm. It doesn't. This one travels beautifully into a modern home, and I'm going to show you how. Here's the truth about what water glass eggs actually need. They need a container that doesn't react with the solution, and they need a spot that stays reasonably cool and out of direct light. That's it. That's the entire requirement. A basement corner is perfect, but so is the bottom of a pantry, the back of a bottom cupboard, the floor of a hall closet, or an unheated spare room. Anywhere that stays below room temperature and doesn't swing hot and cold works fine. The eggs are already sealed inside their little vault of solution. They're not fussy about location. The container can be a food-grade plastic bucket with a lid, a glass jar, a large glass bowl with a plate on top, or a traditional stoneware crock if you're lucky enough to have one. 5 gallons of solution will hold a lot of eggs. A single large glass jar on a closet floor will hold a couple of dozen, which for one person or a couple is a serious cushion against price spikes. You don't need a contractor. You don't need a permit. You don't need to renovate anything or ask a landlord for permission. You need a bucket and a shelf. If you can find room for a case of water bottles, you can find room for a winter's worth of eggs. I've now got a jar going in my own place, tucked in the bottom of a cupboard next to the pots, and I promise you no one who walks through my kitchen has any idea it's there. There's one rule you cannot break though, and it matters more in an apartment than anywhere, so hear me on this. The eggs must be fresh, clean, and unwashed. Do not wash them. Washing scrubs off that natural bloom, the protective coating, and it lets moisture and bacteria reach the shell before the solution can seal it. If an egg has a bit of dirt on it, either wipe it very gently and dry, or just don't use that one. And every egg must be whole, no cracks, not even a hairline. One cracked egg can foul a batch. Candle them if you can, meaning hold each one up to a bright light and check the shell before it goes in. That one habit is the difference between a crock that lasts a year and a crock that lets you down. This is why store eggs in Canada need one extra thought, and I don't want you to miss it. Most commercial eggs here are washed before they're sold, which strips that bloom right off. They can still work in water glass, and plenty of people have done it, but your best, most reliable results come from farm-fresh, unwashed eggs straight from a local farmer, a farm stand, or a neighbor with a few hens. If you've got access to backyard or farm eggs, that's the gold standard. If you can only get store eggs, buy them as fresh as possible and use them a little sooner rather than betting on a full year. So now you've got the where and the what. You know it fits your life, whatever your life looks like. But I still haven't given you the one thing that turns all of this from a nice story into something you can actually do on Saturday. I haven't given you the recipe, the exact proportions, the step-by-step, the thing that was printed in that 1918 material and passed hand to hand across this country and then let go. And that's what I want to give you now, because it's the whole point of everything I've told you, and because I nearly didn't find it. I went back to Walter one more time. I wanted him to walk me through it exactly the way his mother did it, in his own words, before that knowledge left with him. We sat at his kitchen table, and he told me, and then I cross-checked every word of it against the old preservation bulletins from that era until I was satisfied I had it clean and right. Here it is. This is the treasure at the end of the trail. You start with the solution. The classic ratio, the one that shows up again and again in the old sources, and the one Walter's mother used, is 1 part sodium silicate to somewhere between 9 and 11 parts water. Call it roughly 1 cup of water glass to 10 or 11 cups of water. You want the water to be boiled first, and then cooled completely to room temperature, because boiling drives off anything living in it and gives you a clean start. Cooled, boiled water. Never hot water on your eggs. You stir the sodium silicate into the cooled water until it's fully mixed. It'll turn that faint, milky, cloudy color, and that's exactly right. That cloud is what I saw in Walter's crock that first day, and mistook for spoilage. It's not spoilage, it's the seal, waiting. Now, if you can't find sodium silicate, and it's a little harder to come by than it was in Walter's boyhood, there's an even older and even simpler backup that shows up in the same historical record, and this one you can buy at any grocery store. It's called pickling lime, or slaked lime, calcium hydroxide. The old lime water method is this. You dissolve roughly 1 ounce of pickling lime, which is about 2 level tablespoons, into each quart of cooled, boiled water. Stir it well. Some of it will settle to the bottom, and that's fine. That's normal. Let it settle, and you'll have your lime water. Either solution works on the same principle. Both seal the shell. Water glass was the store-bought favorite. Lime water was the even older cottage method that predates it by centuries. Our ancestors in the old country were putting eggs down in lime water long before sodium silicate ever came along. Now the eggs. You place your fresh, clean, unwashed, uncracked eggs gently into your container, pointed end down if you can manage it, though it's not strict. Layer them in without cramming. Then you pour your cooled solution over top until every egg is covered by at least an inch or two of liquid. Every shell must be under the surface. Any egg poking up into the air will spoil, so keep them submerged. And if you add more eggs over the following days as you collect them, just top up the solution to keep everything covered. Put a lid or a plate over the top to keep dust and light out. Set it in your cool, dark spot. And then you do the hardest part of the whole method, which is nothing at all. You leave it alone. You let it sit through the fall and into the deep winter. The eggs settle into that suspended state and simply wait for you. When you want an egg, you reach in with a clean hand or a spoon, lift one out, and rinse it well under running water to wash the solution off the shell. Here's Walter's one warning, and it's a good one. Before you use an egg that's been down a long while, crack it into a separate small bowl first, not straight into the pan, just to check it. A good preserved egg looks and smells like a fresh egg. Trust your nose. And one more tip from the old-timers. If you're going to boil a preserved egg, prick a tiny hole in the wide end with a pin first, because the sealed shell can otherwise crack in the boiling water. Small thing, but it's the kind of detail that only survives when someone actually did this for 50 years and tells you, that's it, that's the whole secret. Cooled boiled water. 1 part water glass to 10 parts water or 2 tablespoons of pickling lime per quart. Fresh unwashed eggs fully submerged. A cool dark corner. And patience. A method the Canada Food Board taught this country in 1918 that fed families through the Depression and 2 World Wars, that a man named Walter kept alive in a crock in a cellar north of Peterborough while the rest of us forgot it ever existed. You can start a jar this very weekend. A dozen fresh eggs, a big glass jar from the cupboard, 2 tablespoons of pickling lime, cooled boiled water over top, lid on, into the bottom of the pantry. By the time eggs are $7 or $8 a dozen in the dead of winter, you'll be eating out of that jar and thinking of Walter. And thinking, maybe, of how much this simple thing would have saved you if only someone had told you 30 years ago. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger, the recovery. Standing in that cellar, I wasn't just looking at a crock of eggs. I was looking at a piece of who we used to be, people who could feed themselves, who didn't flinch at a price tag, who kept a year of security in a bucket and slept fine at night. That got taken from us so gently we never noticed it leave. And now you've got it back. You're the kind of person who always suspected this, aren't you? That the old ways weren't backward, that they were quietly better, and that they didn't disappear by accident, they disappeared because somebody profits every single week from you not knowing them. You were right. You've been right the whole time. This is the proof. So let me ask you something, and I actually want you to answer this one. Had you ever, even once in your life, heard the term water glass before today? Or did your mother or your grandmother have some other way of putting eggs down for the winter that I've never come across? Tell me in the comments. Type it out, even just a line. I read them, and I'm building a map of what our families knew before it all got paved over, and yours is a piece of it. And if you felt something click today, that quiet feeling of getting a piece of yourself back, then come with me on the rest of this. Subscribe, and you're not supporting a channel, you're joining a whole group of us who are digging these methods back up one at a time and refusing to let them die twice. Because the next thing I'm chasing is even bigger. It's about how those same families kept butter and lard from going rancid for a full year with no fridge and no freezer, and there's a second forgotten crock, an even stranger one, sitting in a cold cellar not 40 minutes from where I found the eggs. I've already seen it. And I can't wait to show you what's inside. I'm glad you stayed to the end. Inside the Northern Ways Circle, I walk you through the complete water glass preservation method, step by step, picking up right where we just left off. And you can ask me your own question, I answer you myself. A real person, not a machine. You won't be doing it alone. You'll belong here. Just point your phone at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime. I hope you'll join me.